Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Digital Law News. So my name is Laura Spencer, and I'm an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law. I'm joined today with my colleague Peter, who is a solicitor and also the Managing Director of Digital Law. So I'll just pass over to Peter to introduce himself before we get started with today's stories.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, we're back, and it's been a busy week with quite a few stories, in particular some leaks, data protection breaches that I think we'll all want to know about, so we can make sure that nothing quite as horrific happens to the rest of us. So I will pass back to you so we can start going through our stories for this week.
Cheers, Peter. So yeah, the first one is to do with the Parliament and devices being left in taxis, buses, trains and pubs. So this is a report that was on Computer Weekly, and this is a report that basically goes into some detail, and all this information was found out by a Freedom of Information Act request that was made by think tank Parliament Street, and they made a Freedom of Information request to Downing Street, and out of that, a lot of information came about devices being lost and stolen. So a total of 96 laptops, tablets, smartphones and other devices were actually stolen or lost from parliamentary staff between January 2019 and December 2020. So one of those devices actually disappeared from Downing Street itself. So this data disclosed that of the total, a total of 41 missing tablets, 36 missing laptops, 36 tablets, 11 smartphones, and 6 Skype headsets as well. So it's predicted that a lot of these were lost and stolen from multiple different locations, such as trains, buses, and cars as well. And one of them was actually stolen from somebody who was mugged by a thief riding a bicycle.
Indeed, thanks, Laura. This is such an interesting story. There's several points I think we need to take away from it. One is that initial figure of 96 devices from January 2019 to December 2020. Let's bear in mind that will include one 12-month period of January 2019 to January 2020 of life in what I think we now call the before times. So that was normal life, normal tubes, normal people getting into cabs and leaving things behind. That's normal life. But then we've also got, of course, 11 months of pandemic as well. So lockdowns, pubs opening up in July, more things being left behind, and then of course lockdowns again from November. And during that period, that's still, I think, even though this is a 12-month period, it's almost 2 years. That's still an awful lot of hardware being left in different places. The second point I think we need to bear in mind is that clearly the government isn't following the recommendations of its own National Cybersecurity Centre, which I find incredibly frustrating, because you and I regularly talk about the good work of the NCSC on these updates. I've been to briefings that they run. I've been involved, we've had representatives from the NCSC who've actually come to the Law Society of England and Wales to say this is what law firms should be doing and giving really practical, helpful advice. And you look how hard they're working to try and spread the news about what good practice looks like. And then you look at the performance of Her Majesty's government and you think, well, clearly you're ignoring. You appear to be on send mode rather than receive. And it's just so frustrating. And I'm sure people at NCSC will be just as frustrated to have seen these statistics. I mean, within the last few weeks, we've had news of the fact that the government appears to communicate via WhatsApp. If the screenshots that Dominic Cummings has been sharing are anything to be believed, you've got the Prime Minister talking to Secretaries of State and special advisors via WhatsApp. I've heard the NCSC stand up and say, do not use WhatsApp for anything involving personal data and anything involving business-related activity. So the fact that this is going on at the heart of government, again, is incredible to believe. And if that's being done, what else is happening? I mean, we know the government uses Zoom for cabinet meetings. Again, Zoom is not suitable for confidential related business activity. You might think running the country, you know, talking about pandemic response, economic factors. You might think that was confidential enough not to go on Zoom, but what do we know? What do we know? So there's that point as well. And I think the third point is that this could just be the tip of the iceberg, because of course, as we know, the Freedom of Information Act has that wonderful long list of exemptions. That means if it's, you know, there's certain ways that you can then get out of providing information. If, for example, it is relating to ongoing criminal investigations, you can not disclose things if it relates to national security. So you can imagine that if the Ministry of Defence has mislaid equipment, are those figures in this information that's been disclosed to Computer Weekly? What about if it is information devices lost that it is subject to ongoing criminal investigation, for example? So, for example, what if the Ministry of Justice has lost a job lot of laptops and devices, or the CPS? Would that be part of the statistics that we've had given to us here? So I think there's reason to believe this could just be the tip of the iceberg, which makes it even worse, is the real frustrating thing. So I think the report card for the government says must do better when it comes to just the basics here of keeping hold of their own devices. And if this was a private organisation we were talking about, I think you'd be seeing the share price fall through the floor and you'd see some accountability. But will we see that in government? I hate to say I doubt it, but there you go.
Yeah, exactly. I think your last point there was one of the most interesting ones. That this is just, as it says in the report, parliamentary staffers alone. So all them other departments of the government that aren't directly associated with Parliament could have also lost devices, left them on trains, buses, in pubs, like some people did here. Some of the laptops were just left on a pub table or something like that. So yeah, it could be a lot more than we do expect.
As is always the case when it comes to, I'm afraid, figures that you get from government, it's not what it says on them, it's what it doesn't say. You need to really, and it's that use of the words. Oh, well, this is on the, you know, from parliamentary staffers, and you're thinking, yeah. So it's one thing to say, oh, this is from people who have a parliamentary pass and are working in Parliament. What about wider government? I really do dread to think what the wider figures are.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on to our next story today then. So this is in relation to regulators going after anonymous legal commentators on social media. So I think this links nicely just to solicitors' regulations in general, to be honest. Obviously, I mean, at university at the minute, I'm learning about professional conduct and things like that. And I've just basically gone over the fact that being a professional not only applies in your professional life, but also in your personal life. So on social media, things that you post on social media, things that you do in your personal life can come back and kind of haunt you in your professional life as well, and end up you being dismissed. And this is kind of what happened in this situation here. So the report is on the Times, and it firstly explains that regulators are ramping up efforts to track down anonymous commentators purporting to be lawyers if they come across if they cross the line into professional misconduct on social media. So watchdogs are overseeing solicitors and barristers in England and Wales, and they have told the Times that they will not allow a veil of anonymity to dissuade them from pursuing action for alleged breaches of the profession's code of conduct. So social media is used by lawyers, and they've been thrown into the spotlight over the last couple of weeks. And in particular, a barrister who happily tweeted in plain sight something about the royal family was actually forced to report herself to the regulators over a short Twitter exchange with a columnist for the Sunday Telegraph. So since then, the barrister, I think, has reported herself to the Bar Standards Association, and I'm not quite sure what's happened there after this. But the columnist has been sacked from the Sunday Telegraph as well. So the barrister has been roundly criticised on social media, but whilst others are saying that whilst her comments were insensitive, they could not be seen as racist, as many other people are saying.
Indeed, thanks, Laura. I almost feel that the most revealing thing that you just said there wasn't actually the extract that you were reading from the newspaper articles. What you said before that when you talked about your professional training now. And I think for those of us who qualified back in the days before we were walking around with mini computers in our back pockets, it is very interesting to hear what you just said then about the fact that at law schools now, you as a young lawyer are being trained that standards that apply in the real world also apply online. Now, that's a message that I think those of us of a certain vintage who didn't get that message at law school could have done with hearing. Because as it is, you've got an awful lot of lawyers who are on social media, in particular on Twitter, making various comments, you know, joining in with the great sport of the ubiquitous Twitter pile on, and making great big sweeping comments in 240 characters or less. And sometimes, you know, what they are saying, you could argue, could breach our very high standards of professional conduct. Remembering the fact that as solicitors, technically, even a conversation that you might have with someone over a beer in a pub could be construed as legal advice. So if that is the case, certainly a published tweet on Twitter or post on any other social media is going to therefore carry the same weight. And that's exactly what has happened here in a rather unfortunate exchange between this barrister and a Sunday Telegraph columnist, making some comments that were certainly insensitive and certainly open to very broad interpretation. And that's why this barrister has reported themselves to the Bar Standards Board, but arguably could be seen to be sort of bringing their own professional position into disrepute. I think also they've ended up having a problem with the chambers where they, I mean, as a barrister, you're not employed, you're a member of a chambers, but I think the chambers where she is a member of is also now considering their continuing association with that barrister as a result of a tweet, which seems quite incredible to think of, but in these days, no, a tweet made either currently or even, as we've also found with sports people who suddenly, you know, a tweet from 8 or 9 years ago can suddenly be unearthed and can lead to problems. And in the same way that we are hearing about sports people having to make apologies, and there was an England cricketer, Ollie Robinson, I think his name was, who made his England professional debut, should have been the happiest day of his professional career, spends 8 hours standing out there in the field, walks back into the clubhouse at the end of the day at Lord's and is told, this tweet that you sent 8 years ago when you're 18 years old has now surfaced and contained, I'm not for any moment excusing what he said, because what he'd put on there was pretty awful. No one actually knows what it was because it's now been deleted, but the point is that it was seen, it went online. So he's now had to make apologies. He's been suspended from play, so he didn't play in the second test, and no one now knows if he will play cricket again for England. And in the same way that, you know, that applies to sports people, in the same way we've got problems now with lawyers being, given that we hold ourselves to high standards anyway, you've also got the problem of things that solicitors, barristers say both now, or the stuff you may have said 8, 9, 10 years ago can suddenly turn around and bite you. So if you do have, you know, a Twitter account you've been running for the last 10 years, think quite carefully about some of the stuff that you may have said in the past. Have you always necessarily applied the filter that you may apply to yourself now back when you started out? In particular, if you're at school, college, university, when you opened that account, you know, are there pictures of you on debauched nights out, or sending, you know, having dialogue with someone else on there that is particularly crude, or, you know, crude images, etc. All that sort of stuff can potentially cause problems in later life. And from a solicitor barrister perspective, it's a matter of thinking about that professional responsibility, professional conduct side. And circling back again, I'm very pleased to hear that that's now something that is being addressed in law schools. So the message is being applied to our young lawyers from the get-go, as it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this just doesn't just apply to professionals as well, or legal professionals or whatever. It applies to anyone in the workplace, to be honest. I know a lot of employers now do look at people's phone, Instagrams and Facebook and other social media to see what things could come back and have an impact on the company in the future. Because as an employee for a company, you are obviously have an effect on that company's reputation. If something comes back and is out there public, that's something you've said later down on life comes back, it could look back bad on that company as well. So not just legal professionals or professionals in general, just anybody with who works in a workplace.
Exactly. And it could be, I mean, you always tend to think, you know, shy away from expressing an opinion, you know, so I think it's always safest not to refer to politics, not to refer to religion, never say anything that could be construed as being discriminatory in any way, shape or form. And, you know, also be aware when expressing humour that what one person thinks is hilarious, someone else might find offensive. So sometimes it's a matter of thinking, you know, is this, you know, simple, gentle, inoffensive humour, or are you expressing something that someone else might look at and think, well, I don't think that's particularly funny at all. In fact, I find it quite offensive. Obviously, applying all of those filters, you're going to be quite limited in what you express on social media, but better that than to have your future professional or employment prospects jeopardized, arguably.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we should leave it to just posts of dogs and food is probably the safest bet. Yeah, keep it as vanilla as possible, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the approach I go with anyway. So yeah, moving on to the next story then. So this is on the Daily Mail, and this is in relation to hackers stealing 26 million logins from Amazon, Apple, Facebook and other tech giants after targeting PCs and making off with payment information from 3 million devices in the latest major cyber breach. So this is a attack that's being carried that has been exposed by cyber security provider NordLocker. And they've done some research, and basically a 1.2 terabyte database filled with stolen personal information was uncovered on the internet for anyone to see. So this information included company information from users of Apple, Amazon, Facebook, eBay, Instagram, Netflix, PayPal, Roblox, Steam, Twitter and Twitch as well. So it's thought that they've got onto people's computers by sending infected emails and download bootleg software, which enables the malware to actually then take screenshots of their browsing history and private login details and take other information such as payment information from there as well. So quite a big hack there as well.
Indeed, and the fact that, of course, we're talking about people's personal data and payment information is scary, given that we're talking about millions of records here. I mean, 1.2 terabytes is a very large amount of data, a very rich amount of data as well. The other concerning thing here is the sheer range of companies that are affected. So I think we tend to think as consumers that when we are providing our payment information to Apple or Amazon, Netflix, PayPal, Facebook, eBay, you tend to think that, oh, well, these people are reputable, they'll have good, secure systems, it's not a problem to be providing my money there. You sometimes tend to think, well, if you're actually buying, say, you know, tickets or something online and it's a company you haven't heard of, that's sometimes when the antenna come up on the back of your neck and you think, maybe I should be entering my information here. But we're talking about the big blue chip tech companies, and it's quite surprising to see that their systems have been compromised and that this data was available unencrypted and could be accessed by hackers using malware and knew what they were doing in this instance. And of course, it's as usual, it's people opening emails, downloading dodgy software that's then enabled malware to go in, take screenshots of browsing history and login information. And then, of course, that's meaning that you're able to circumvent the most sophisticated encryption because you're doing it via screenshot. And you always have to end up typing this information in somehow, somewhere on your device or on your laptop or on your desktop. And that's how they've got around it, because they're just taking a screenshot. So regrettably, as usual, you found hackers have found a way to get around the most sophisticated systems by instead just sort of embedding this screenshot technology. And in that way, they've got the logins, the passwords, the payment information, and who knows what else. again, I mean, if you're taking images in terms of screenshots, those are quite rich files in terms of their size, but that's when it says 1.2 terabytes, that's an awful lot of screenshots that they ended up taking in this instance. And now the question's going to be, what action is taken? Will we see regulators in Europe, EU data protection regulators on this, actually taking definitive action or not? Will the UK ICO, or will there be any action there? Given some of the companies here, so Amazon, Apple, Facebook, will there be any enforcement of the California Consumer Privacy Act if Californians have been affected by this? So who's going to take a stand? I think that's one of the biggest takeaways I took from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of staying on the same front with that, in relation to Amazon as well. So the next story is in relation to Amazon and their potential facing of a huge fine for a data breach. So it is said that Amazon could be fined up to more than 350 million euros by a privacy regulator over its collection and use of data across the EU. So Amazon's European headquarters are actually in Luxembourg. So therefore, Luxembourg regulator will be the one who's handling this fine. But that doesn't mean they might communicate with other regulators to decide the best option going forward. So officials have concluded that the company have fallen foul of GDPR. So a fine will definitely be coming from this, or some regulatory action. But the fine will be the largest of such financial penalty by far since the imposition of GDPR, with the current largest fine being by the French regulator in 2019, which was 50 million euros against Google. So Amazon have not commented on this so far and declined to comment, so not heard anything back from them.
Indeed, thanks, Laura. And this is a big test. So again, it's what action will regulators take? We have Amazon as a Luxembourg-based corporation, as far as the European Union is concerned, and that's where the decisions are made with regards to the storage of data. So that is the regulator that will be handling any potential enforcement on this. And you've hinted there at the fact that this could be the largest fine yet levied under GDPR. Let's not forget that, of course, Marriott and British Airways were facing fines of over £100 million originally, but those were drastically reduced on appeal when it then came to the global pandemic. And I think the argument that obviously hotel and airlines were hit quite heavily, plus they were able to provide a lot of information and mitigation. So those fines were reduced down to sort of a fifth of what they would otherwise have been, which leaves that one fine by CNIL, the French data protection regulator, as the biggest GDPR fine to date. Now, given that when it came to the introduction of GDPR in 2018, a lot of organizations said, we think this is all smoke and mirrors and no one's actually going to apply these massive fines. It's just there to scare us. I think you could be justified in then looking at the fact that there haven't been particularly massive fines. And indeed, the volume of fines issued under GDPR is actually quite small when you look at across all the data protection regulators. They've generally shied away from taking significant action around GDPR. I mean, you only have to look at the ICO and a lot of the fines that you and I have talked about over the course of the last year. They've not actually been in relation to fines for GDPR enforcement. It's very often been for the privacy and electronic communications regs. So, sending out millions of spam emails or texts, that sort of thing. But that's not GDPR, is it? And now that we've got, one of the biggest, Amazon here, let's not forget that the majority of Amazon's income comes from its AWS cloud storage. So people trust it. People think, oh, it's Amazon, big corporation, I will be safe hosting my business on Amazon. Well, will you, if it turns out they've been fined hundreds of millions of euros? So this has really significant potential here. Will we see the Luxembourg data protection regulator, supported by the European Data Protection Board, taking significant action? Or will it again be words, platitudes, but actually shying away from taking significant enforcement? Let's see, because I think we're getting to the point where if GDPR is going to be successful, when you get large data breaches like this, there has to be clear enforcement. Otherwise, any corporation, any board being told by a specialist, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that for GDPR, quite rightly is going to turn around and say, do we really?
Yeah.
Because it's all well and good to say, oh, you could face these massive fines, you could face these massive civil liabilities, but if it's not actually happening in reality, it becomes more and more tempting to say, well, forget it, we'll take the gamble, we think we'll be okay. Which obviously you shouldn't, because you're not complying with the law. But the point is, you know, it's going to, I think, encourage those who would like to avoid spending the time and the resources on GDPR compliance if you don't see the examples of enforcement when there is a clear breach.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was going to say. I covered that very well. So moving on to the last story for today then. So this is in relation to cryptocurrency and the purchasing of large items, so luxury flats and private jets, etc. So there's been a warning by the director of the National Crime Agency. So Nigel Leary, who is the director of the National Crime Agency, has said that he had significant concerns about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies being used for large purchases such as property or private jets. So big volume of cryptocurrency payments are often linked to organised crime and therefore do not usually have enough safeguards in place for such payments. So his warnings comes after developments from after the developer, Nick Candy, said that he would take offers in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies for an 18,000 square feet, 5-bedroom penthouse, which is on sale for £175 million in One Hyde Park development in Knightsbridge. And there's also been some information from Private Fly, who are a private jet operator, who have reported that 1 in 10 of its flights in January alone were actually paid for in Bitcoin, which represents around 20% of their sales. So a lot of these payments are taking place via Bitcoin, which don't have the correct regulations or the correct safeguards in place to kind of look where this money is coming from in terms of money laundering, organised crime, etc. And hopefully more is brought about it and kind of more regulations are introduced to govern this.
Indeed, we come back to our old subject of money laundering, and I know as well, Laura, I mean, your studies so far have included, I mean, how many times have you ended up looking at money laundering as part of the conduct that studies that you're doing? I think it's several times, certainly more often than I did in my legal training, which was more years ago than I care to remember. But this brings us round to, I mean, cryptocurrency has been a massive subject this year. Bitcoin has made massive gains on the markets during the course of the year and then lost most of those gains during the course of the last week. The problem with cryptocurrency is, of course, it wildly fluctuates in value. Cryptocurrencies do not have central banks behind them, so it's not as though you've got policymakers and rate setters and the ability to buy and sell debt, quantitative easing, all these sorts of things. You can't do that with a cryptocurrency. All you can have behind a cryptocurrency is a blockchain. And some cryptocurrencies out there do not even have a blockchain behind them, and very often are pretty much pyramid schemes or vehicles of fraud in that instance. But even where you do have a cryptocurrency backed by a blockchain and with the right technology and safeguards in place, increasingly we are looking at the need to apply more regulation. So already in the UK, we have the Financial Conduct Authority saying in order to operate as a cryptocurrency in the UK, you need to register with them and you need to pass certain criteria with regards to, again, our old friend, anti-money laundering checks. And at the moment, I think it's only about 5 or 6 cryptocurrencies that are registered, if I remember rightly, Laura.
Yeah, I think there's only about 5. There's some on the pre-registration list, because I think you can it's kind of like a pre-register before you actually gone onto the register, and I think there's a lot of companies going through there. But I think the FCA are kind of refusing a lot of companies' applications because they're kind of failing at these hurdles, so they're then going to have to go back, change the way they're operating as a business, and then kind of reapply again to hopefully get back on the register.
And indeed, it's also a matter of what can you buy with your cryptocurrency. And as we're seeing here, I mean, we've heard that the headline in the business pages recently has been Tesla accepting Bitcoin for Teslas. So at one point that was on the cards, and then Elon Musk turned around and said, well, actually, we are probably not going to do that. Suddenly people are waking up to the fact that if it's a cryptocurrency, it uses huge amounts of the Earth's fragile resources to power all of those servers all around the world that, of course, are powering that blockchain, that distributed ledger. And therefore, there's been sort of, are you going to be able to buy a Tesla with it or not? Now there's talk again, he's saying, well, we might do it after all. And then we've even got this developer saying, yes, I'll take cryptocurrency for my £175 million flat. As well as, I found that fascinating about the private jet operators saying, oh, yes, we'll take crypto in payment for flights. I mean, let's bear in mind here that very often businesses will do and take certain action in terms of how they will accept payment. That is driven more by the market. So, i.e., they are getting more customers saying, can I pay you in Bitcoin for my flight? And they're thinking, well, we're responding to that need by saying, yes, we will accept it. Though you would also think that if they were then being paid and then finding that for whatever reason they couldn't then themselves sell the cryptocurrency they then have, or have difficulty redeeming it, then they probably would not continue to accept it. The fact they are continuing to accept it suggests it's working for them. So we're almost seeing the market move in this direction, but then that's coming against the immovable object of regulation by, like we've just said, the FCA, other national regulators as well. But I think this just flags up the risk. I think when we hear a warning from the director of the National Crime Agency, we should listen very carefully to what they have to say. So there was a very interesting article actually in the Sunday Times just a week ago of one of their journalists who tried to speculate to become a sort of billionaire when it came to cryptocurrency, and it didn't go quite to plan, and I think they've ended up losing more than they made. And I think that just shows that you have to be very cautious with any dabbling when it comes to cryptocurrency, and bear in mind that any money that you put in, you may lose. So if you think investing on the stock market is like a roulette wheel, this is 10 times more extreme. So I think if you are going to invest, go into it with your eyes wide open, and don't think it's just a quick way to end up becoming a millionaire when it could be a quick way to losing just as potentially more than you've even put in. Who knows? So yes, be cautious. Be very cautious of anything that you can't. When it comes to this, I'd be very wary of experts or purported experts telling you what will or will not work, and I'd listen carefully. As I say, when crime agency or when the FCA are making comments here, I think that's a bit of a red light, because then it's flashing up and saying, what can you do with your cryptocurrency if you're in the UK? And if you're finding that you can't then redeem it, you can't buy it for anything of financial value, what is its actual worth?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, because a lot of these cryptocurrencies, it's really difficult to get your money out of it. You've kind of got to exchange it to a different cryptocurrency, or convert it into like US dollar tokens to try and get your money out somehow. And I think a lot of people think they're going to invest into Bitcoin, invest into other cryptocurrencies, and as soon as it goes up, they'll be able to take the money out straight away and they've won something. But it's not as simple as that.
It's not like the stock market. It's not like the GameStop bubble earlier this year, where you could ride the wave and then jump off when you wanted to. It's an infinitely more complex process. Good luck if you've found ways that work. Then good luck to you. And I'm not saying if you don't want to dabble, but I think for those who are sort of looking and not quite sure, I'd be very cautious before committing any resources to it. Yeah,
absolutely. So that's all the stories we've got time for today. So we just want to give a quick mention to our GDPR compliance manual for legal practices that we still have on offer at the minute. So this was originally on sale in May of 2018 when GDPR came into force for around £195, but now it is around 50% off, and it's on offer for £99. So this is available in hard copy and digital copy as well, with just an extra £5 for postage and packaging for the hard copy. So I'll just pass over to you, Peter, just to give a little bit more information about the manual.
Yeah, so this is our GDPR compliance manual for law firms, containing all the forms, templates and checklists to help you get a handle on your GDPR compliance. GDPR is very good at telling you what to do, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. This guidance does. Also, while it is technically a GDPR manual for law firms, it actually works very well for other regulated practices. So we've found that accountants, those in financial services, insurance, education, have all found this to be quite a useful manual, and have been able to work some of the recommendations in it into how they're operating their businesses too. So a real snip there at less than £100 for some really high quality guidance and information.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just want to say a big thank you as well to Anson Evaluate for helping us produce this webinar. So for those who don't know, Anson Evaluate provides training, webinar and consultancy services. So if you are interested in getting your own webinar or any training in general for your company or your employees or anything, just drop them an email to admin@ansonevaluate.com and they'll be able to help you out. There is also some very good blog posts up on their site at the minute as well. I think one went up the other day about wireless routers and things like that as well. So definitely check those out.
Indeed, wireless routers, driverless cars, AI, there is some really good content on there. And also Anson Evaluate are in the process of putting together a series of webinars around data protection, cybersecurity and social media law. So if you are interested in registering for those, please do take a look at the website. Dates are soon to be published, but if you are keen to be able to get your places booked ahead of time, please do let us know and we can put you onto the waiting list for priority. And then, as I say, please do keep an eye on the site for dates and times of when those webinars will be broadcast.
Great, thanks, Peter. So yeah, thank you for everyone for listening today. Just a reminder, these podcasts usually do come out every week. We did miss, I think, one last week, but we will be continuing now once every week. So these are available as a webinar through our website and our YouTube channel, and also on different podcast channels as well. So thank you for listening, and we hope to see you all next week.